if you had the inclination to want to do it. In other words, to hide the access. One of the things that we find, this is not just in Richard's research, but really throughout the UFO and clandestine literature, would be the trip down to highly secure underground facilities by a long, long elevator ride. One hears about this a lot. I recall having spoken with the great remote viewer Ingo Swann. Many of you know Ingo or know of him. In the mid-1970s, he argued, or he stated, that he himself was brought to a clandestine underground facility in which he was taken by helicopter, part of the way, taken to a place, blindfolded, brought into a building, put into an elevator, and then went down, 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 down. He has no idea how far down it was, but very far down, apparently. This is one thing that comes up a lot. Now, let me discuss some of the plans that we do know that exist by the military to go deep underground. One of the more significant ones that we have is known as the Deep Underground Command Center. And these plans go back to 1963. 1963. This is a document that Richard Sauder found. It's dated November 7th, 1963. It's kind of hard to read here. These are memos that went to the Presidents, Kennedy and President Johnson. They were familiar with this, with these plans. Various levels of the Department of Defense discussed this, talking about the feasibility of designing and constructing a command facility at depths of about 3,500 feet. So that's, two-thirds of a mile, roughly. More than that. Maybe 70% of a mile. There's a lot that I want to cover in this, and I don't really feel that I can cover everything in this book with justice, but I will point out that Richard Sauder argues that it's his opinion that something like this was in fact built under Washington, D.C. One thing to keep in mind is that the Washington metro system began construction in 1969. The question that we may want to ask is, could this, at least in part, have served as cover for the DUCC, the Deep Underground Command Center? Certainly, I think it could have. The issue always is when you want something built in secret, you've got to find the right kind of cover for it. You can't just start blasting away. People may notice. Although, in fact, this is what happened under Dick Cheney's mansion, vice presidential mansion, during the Bush years. Something Richard writes about that I really wasn't planning to cover, but I'll just mention here. All kinds of explosions were heard at Dick Cheney's vice presidential mansion for like a year. I forget which year, I think 2003, 2004. They were obviously doing construction under his mansion for a deep underground facility. There's an entire chapter in this book that deals with Washington, D.C. and what's underground there. That is, I think, very worth reading. But the point with the Deep Underground Command Center is it certainly helps to have cover, and certainly the Washington metro system might have served as cover for that. Another interesting fact about underground bases, clandestine, is a statement made by a man. I'm not sure that when he made this statement in 1987 he was expecting it to get out. This is Lloyd Dusha. I believe he's still alive. I don't know for a fact. He was the deputy director of the Engineering and Construction Corps, construction for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So he's one of the top civilian office or executives of the Army Corps of Engineers. So he was speaking in 1987 to a professional group and made some very interesting statements about classified underground facilities. First, he said that several of the most interesting facilities that have been designed and constructed by the Corps are classified. Okay, well, really, I guess that shouldn't be surprising to us. He says there are other projects of similar scope, and here he was talking about the large underground base, NORAD base, Cheyenne Mountain. There are many other projects of similar scope which I cannot identify. In other words, he couldn't talk about them. But which included, he said, multiple chambers of up to 50 feet wide and 100 feet high. So here we have a direct statement by one of the very, very top people in the know who would know about clandestine underground bases. And in fact, he says in 1987, yes, absolutely, we've got them. They're classified. I really can't talk about them, but they're very big. Building tunnels. You know, tunnels are very interesting. One of the things about a tunnel is that we discovered back in the 1860s that it was possible to build a substantial tunnel in total secrecy without anyone knowing, because a gentleman named Alfred Eli Beach did it. He actually started digging out of the basement of, I forget the name of the building, built a subway under Broadway in New York City. Now, the problem with New York City in the 1860s and 70s was total disorganization, municipal corruption. A subway was drastically needed even in the 1860s, 1870s, but it just wasn't going to happen. But Beach did create this, and it worked. The thing worked. It was propelled through a tube by a fan, which was powered by a steam engine. Now, he was a very, very astute man, Alfred Beach. Even in the 1870s, it was understood that by creating a vacuum in the tube, you could really increase speed. Now, the problem, of course, in logistics, how do you create a vacuum in the 1870s underground? Not easy to do. But what Beach suggested or envisioned was that by creating a vacuum in the tube, and, quote, if the proper mountings for a light train car could be realized, and proper fittings, that a speed of 100 miles per hour might safely be realized, and that at the time would have been about 4 times the speed of the fastest train. He went on to say that in a pneumatic system, and this is really what this is, because it's air propelled, okay? No locomotives are employed, so you wouldn't need engines down there. Hence that the roadway and cars might be very light. Well, Beach was not the last person to think about pneumatic tubes underground. Actually, one thing that Richard discussed were a variety of German scientists who worked on this matter, and a number of the German plans brought over through Project Paperclip to the United States. One of the Americans to work on pneumatic underground tubes and this whole concept was Robert Goddard, who is, of course, the father of modern rocketry. Well, Goddard also, toward the end of his life, developed a very strong interest in underground transportation. In fact, developed a couple of patents in 1944, 1945, dealing with high-speed, super high-speed vacuum tube shuttle systems. And as he described it, it would be a system in transportation in which a car containing goods or passengers is moved at a high speed through a transportation tube which is maintained under a substantial vacuum. And what he then suggested is that a forward or horizontal acceleration of 4.89 Gs would make the time of transit from Boston to New York, 200 miles, in 2 minutes 46 seconds. That's moving. New York to San Francisco in 10 minutes. Okay, now we might look at that and think that's just not credible, but I am at least willing to give Robert Goddard some credit here and recognize that he might have been onto something. And it wasn't just Robert Goddard. A gentleman named Michael Minimus, back in the early 60s, had been involved in doing calculations for NASA, for the Jet Propulsion Lab, I believe, having to do with developing a gravity assist for orbital aircraft. Okay, well, he used those skills and that training to develop this absolutely fascinating design. And this is a deep underground maglev tube shuttle. Maglev meaning magnetic levitation, of course. A high-speed transit system. Now, the speeds that Minimus envisioned were not nearly as fast as what Goddard was imagining, but very fast indeed. But the genius of this system is that it didn't involve practically any energy output. The whole thing was gravity. Magnetic suspension, frictionless and propelled by gravity. And that's why this is a design of it here. So you've got the ground